Actually, I'm just going to sit down and we're going to do a musical ministry today and just let Mary Lynn take over. Everybody just get in that groove, you know. And I sensed there was some movement going on behind me. A few dancers. So, namaste, shalom, om shanti, bendiciones para todos ustedes. This month, we're just going to talk about me. Or, no, mental equivalence. That's what it is. M-E. That's the title of my talk today. It's all about me, mental equivalence. Creating and manifesting, the thought and the feeling. And I love, Randy, thank you so much. I love being able to watch and listen to the other speakers, you know, Reverend Bonnie and Randy and Peggy. Peggy said something a couple of weeks ago, talking about source. She says, it, referring to God, makes things out of itself by becoming the thing it makes. This is God as us. I am God's mental equivalent, or as Sandy Scott and Peggy used to say, I'm God in drag. We're all God in drag. So I always thought that was an interesting quote. So Reverend Bonnie asked, how much interest does your good get? How much time are you spending on trying to create what you want? And her overall theme for the year is a world that works for everyone. And for me, that starts with you. And only the things that you can affect and change, which is yourself. I have tried to change my dad. I've tried to change my ex-wife. I've tried to change everybody. You'd think I'd learn by now. It doesn't work. The only thing I can change is me. And I used to say in some of my manifesting process, I used to say whatever I was going to say, and then highest and best for all concerned. And Master Ko taught me, he said, Bram, he said, if you do that, what you're doing is diluting the process. He said, because if you want the highest and best for you and the highest and best for Doug and Tina and everybody, then it gets kind of watered down. He said, you need to want the highest and best for you. That's not selfish. Stay focused on what you want and only that. And so I looked at things a little bit differently. It reminds me of the video that you showed last week, the harmony video. Because see, I believe that each one of us as an individual, we can only play our note. And when we each play our note, we all sound wonderful together. We're not the same, because if I try to be someone else or we try to be something else, then all it ends up being is a homogenization. It's just all bland. It's just one note. And that doesn't work. It takes a diverse approach to things, a different thought process for many different people. And again, we can't change from things out here. All the change comes from within. We're studying Emmett Fox this month, and Larry, thank you so much for sending me his lectures on mental equivalence. Larry reminded me, though, it's just not mental equivalence, it's the mental equivalent of X, of something, where it's either something that you want to create or something that you want to get rid of. And that's the focus that we're looking at. The mental equivalent requires that thought, what you're thinking of, and then you put it with a warm feeling. It says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So it's the thought and the feeling. You get those two put together, it aligns your thought process, puts it on steroids, and that's how we manifest things. I used to write down affirmations. I had a lot of affirmations at one point, especially when I'd get to things when they were not going really well. I said, well, I better start writing some things down and put them in a positive way. And when I would read these, I remember being at Channel 4 years ago and absolutely miserable at one point in my career. And so every morning when I would get there, I'd clear the energy space and I would read through these affirmations. And at first they were pretty good. But then after a while, they lost their energy, they lost their passion, they lost the feeling, and that's what we must add, the clarity of the context, but with the emotion that you want to put with it. And whenever I've manifested anything, I have those things lined up, and when I don't, I wonder, well, what's wrong with God? You know, what's she doing today? You know, because I know this works because I've done it before. Or whatever my idea of God was at that point in my life, you know, because what I was doing was right because it's worked, but it's when I started doing the things by rote, and they lost their feeling. That's when things didn't go very well. I remember back in 2008, during the financial crisis, the meltdown, all those other adjectives that we had for the realignment of what happened to the economy. A lot of people lost their jobs, including me. And so I thought, well, did this happen to me or did this happen for me? But that's the message that I gave last September, so I won't get back into that. But we look at those things, and I would talk to people, and they would say, oh yes, yeah, I've got the joy of the Lord in my heart, and I'm sending out my resumes, and I'm trying and stuff like that, and it was just real. And then they'd start to tell you, well, God, I've sent out a dozen resumes, and that lady was so rude to me on the phone the other day. Can you believe she said I was overqualified and I couldn't do this job? And that's where all the passion, that's where all the emotion came in. And guess what they were creating? Putting all that emotion into the exact opposite mental equivalent of what their heart's desire is. So it's the clarity of thought, and then you add the emotion to it. Reverend Bonnie said a couple of weeks ago, the only way to have the mental equivalent is to think about what you want. And if you're not thinking about what you want, if it's something negative, you've got to substitute it. It's the law of substitution. So correct thoughts expunge wrong thoughts. But another way to look at that, and I'm taking a quote out of Emmett Fox's book here, The Mental Equivalence, says, I'm not going to talk about resentment. I don't believe in resentment. Resentment doesn't work. I'm not going to give it any more energy because resentment is just bad. What do you think we're doing when we put that much energy and mental equivalent in talking about resentment? It's holding you there. So there's, I think you talked about it, whatever you do, don't think about a pink elephant with, purple polka dots right here. You better start, if you're going to replace that, you got to replace it with something else. Think about a big yellow giraffe with black dots or whatever. It's just, and it's kind of funny, but that's as simple and as difficult as it is to change the thought process. Instead of thinking about fear, thinking about abundance and peace, substituting the wrong mental equivalent with the correct one. I've told people over and over again, especially around New Year's, on these New Year's resolutions, things like that, only think about what you want to create more of. Hardest thing in the world, just very plain and simple. Only think about what you want to create more of. What we're giving our mental energy to. I remember the first time anybody had told me about the law of substitution. I was living in San Antonio. It was the early 90s. I had just moved from Albuquerque to San Antonio, didn't know anybody down there, just got out of a long-term relationship, was going through a kind of a dark night of the soul, and this friend of mine gave me my first Science of Mind magazine and stuff like that and said, just think about positive things. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? She said, well, when this pain pops up, these painful memories, whatever, just think about something positive. I said, like what? And she said, well, say God is good, God is great. I'm like, great, that lasted all of 2 seconds. Now what? She said, well, say it again. And so I did God is good, God is great for a while, and I figured, man, I better come up with something else. And that's when I started to commit, certain scriptures and things like that to memory, the Lord's Prayer. And I finally did that, and that would take about 60 seconds. And then I might be right back to where I was, but at least that was the law of substitution. Find anything that's positive or the opposite of what you don't want and focus on that. So, this morning I didn't get a chance to go into detail with Skip. I said, how you doing? I said, I've had a challenging week. And I said, well, let's go pray in because however challenging it was, this praying will help. And he absolutely agreed. I was talking to David. I said, how are things going? He said, well, I'm wanting to create some things, but I'm just not quite sure yet. I'm working on a class, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing that. I tell people when bad things happen, because bad things happen to good people, apparently, did we create all that stuff? Some things yes, some things no. I believe that we're co-creators in our experience. But I believe, and when you feel bad about that stuff, I say wallow all in it. Get it all over you. Experience the, of it, because that's going to make this feel so much better when you get there. So I believe in being a realist. I don't read this stuff and drink the Kool-Aid and think it's all kumbaya and going to be great. No, there's a process to it, and we either co-created or allowed or had the mental equivalent for whatever showed up in our life. So let's deal with it. Let's respect it. Let's see it where it is. But then Abraham talks about pivot. Pivot away from it. Where do you want to go? What do you want it to be? What do you want it to look like? Respect it, but just don't ruminate on it. Don't stay there. And even think about the words I'm using. Don't. Use it the other way around. Because whatever you hear after don't is what you do. The mind does not process negation. Don't drink and drive, or I won't do that, or I won't think about resentment. No, turn things into the positive. I think it was April, we were talking about words and the power of words and things like that. Whenever those painful thoughts would come up, that's when you have to pivot. And what Fox talks about, he says that is the key to the management of our mind, the management of our thinking, and therefore the management of our destiny, focusing on positive things to supplant the negative things. Find a good emotion. Love is always a good one. Jesus told us that we always demonstrate our consciousness. You always demonstrate what you habitually have in your mind. We experience in the outer what we're thinking about in the inner. So if you take a look around and examine the conditions, a very scary thing to do sometimes, that's what we're demonstrating. He says the method is scientific and infallible. And that's a pretty scary thing to do. Take that mental inventory. Take a look around. Where am I? Am I in a loving relationship? Am I in a job that inspires me, that fulfills me? Am I making a difference? Am I happy or joyful in my life? Fox says that the most important thing he could say about creating the life you desire is to change your thought and keep it changed. That's the booger bear right there. Keep it changed. You already have a mental equivalent of all the good things that you have in your life. He says create the mental equivalent of the things that you want to get rid of. So what he's talking about is not changing your mind for 10 seconds or for 10 days, but permanently. And that's the thing to do. That's the hard thing that we have to focus on. Building this new mental equivalent, because the new mental equivalent is always what's demonstrated. And this is where I call this the ugly part of New Thought or Science of Mind or whatever, because they say work defeats itself in a spiritual essence or setting, and I believe that's true. And I also believe that we must be focused. There must be attention to what we're going to do. It just can't be, I'm going to do this every once in a while and hope it works. How often do you brush your teeth? Every day, we hope, and stuff like that. You got to have a practice that you develop over time to make those muscles stronger. So I don't think anybody wants to hear that it takes effort, that it takes focus, and that's what we're looking at. Think prosperity and allow, this is what I was going to say. I was thinking about my dad. A lot of us, we think about health for a few minutes, and then you just kind of slip back off and you start thinking about, the sickness and stuff like that. Or you think, I'm going to be positive. I'm going to think about prosperity. And we do it for a little while, and then we just slide back down into the fear. Fear can really change some things. It seems like the lower vibration is so much easier to think about sometimes. That's why the focus and the energy of the thought in changing that thought process, not for a little bit of time, but a permanent state, little by little, eating that elephant one bite at a time. That's what we're looking at. I get in trouble sometimes when I stay focused on my thoughts. I really try to pay attention to my words. So I'll listen to Rev Bram and not talk about politics or how we don't have some of the candidates that we would like at this time. We're just going to manifest really good stuff for all those people out there. Every single person that gave me a hug today and they asked me how I was doing, what was my response? Blessed. I am blessed. I believe it. It's true. I am always blessed. I might have some really interesting weeks or really interesting days and things like that, and I am always blessed. I'm pretty good at paying attention to my thoughts. I'm better at my words, and I'm really lousy sometimes with my emotions. Being a redheaded Leo with anger issues, I got a lot of good stuff to work on this time around. But it's if you hang around me long enough, you'll hear me say, cancel clear. Cancel clear. Whenever I hear that, that's because I've heard somebody say something that I believe is detrimental to either themselves or me. And I'll change the energy and I'll say, cancel clear. And where I get in trouble with that is I probably shouldn't say that out loud. I can just think it and it'll be okay. Because the reason I do it is because, one, I want to protect, I'm really strict and vigilant about the energy around me, and I do want to pay attention, but it comes off as holier than thou, or I'm some jerk, or I believe I know better, or something like that. And believe me, I don't know any better, but what I do know is what I've been able to manifest. That's the only thing that really is true or not. Is it real for you or not? So hopefully you won't hear me say that out loud anymore, and I'll just be thinking it. Fox says to take your problem and change your mind concerning it. You've all heard me say, Paul in his letter to the Romans, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. But change goes back and forth. True transformation is more permanent, and that's what we're talking about. Allowing the new mental equivalent to take effect and manifest your desired outcome. Don't talk about there I go again, don't. I guess I have to pay attention to the words. It says, do not talk about the negative condition as if it were there. We just switch it over, only talk about the positive. When you continue to ask the question, you create that vibration of the question, and that's not the vibration of the answer. And so that's what we're looking at. Thoughts and words matter because they become matter. Nothing ever came into manifestation before the mental equivalent was present. And we create our conditions of our lives by the feelings or vibrations we have, the thoughts we entertain, the mental equivalents we hold, and the words that we use. Realizing that something might not be the way we want it, that's a really good first step, but then what are we going to do with it? How do you pivot? How do you turn away from that to create what you want? But the faster we're able to turn and put the attention on the solution, the quicker things are going to come around for us. Abraham says you don't have to clean up your vibration relative to anything. You just have to, you can't think about what you don't want anymore. That's why we teach meditation. Real hard to get to pure positive thought, but if you can get to no thought, that's even better. Because that, at least you've got a clean slate. So to keep intensely looking at the problem is just reaffirming the problem. Again, we've got to respect it for a little while, but then we've got to turn. And we must look to the answers within instead of out here. When we pray, as I talked about those affirmations, when we pray from the outside, sometimes by rote. Now, I'll probably contradict myself here. I think it's probably okay to do anything to get your mind off of that purple elephant with the pink polka dots or whatever. And if you have to do that by rote, like I learned the Lord's Prayer or some of the other things, I think that's okay, because that's the pivot point. But when you're looking at creation and you're manifesting, you're looking at a very specific idea, and then you're adding good energy to it. That must have feeling, or the prayers are kind of lifeless. That must have energy to go with it. It says, be still and know that I am God. Go within and listen to the still small voice within. Something that I read in his lecture, he says, the door of the soul opens inward. So the harder we push to open the door, the tighter we keep it closed. It says just to relax, let go and let God. Allow the spiritual aspect of your energy take over and let the door open inward. I mentioned earlier that Jesus said that we always demonstrate our consciousness. We demonstrate what we habitually have in mind. And as we look around and take that inventory, I have to take a look at what I've created. And for the most part, there's, prosperity, abundance, joy. But you all have heard me speak here over the last couple of years. Apparently, I don't know whether I created it or not, but I was involved in a very large lawsuit against our company. I went through a divorce, the end of a 20-year marriage, and it was completely all her fault, as you all know. And no. And you have to take a look and be real about what we have created, what we co-create. It was so much easier at the beginning when I looked at this lawsuit, which is a scary thing that threatens the entire livelihood of the company, of our families, of all the families that work there, realizing that it was unfounded. It had no basis. Somebody just looking for money. And my first thought was, oh, man, I want to get that guy. And that's not right. And I could justify it 10 different ways from Sunday. And I quickly had to get my mind wrapped around the thought after being angry, which I was for a little bit. I had to pivot, though, and I had to start thinking, all right, what do I want? Well, I want this to turn out really well. And everything that I prayed for 2 years as we went through that process, everything I prayed for me, I prayed for him. I even went through, even in my workouts that I was doing in swimming, the ho'oponopono, the Hawaiian forgiveness technique. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And again, you're saying it to yourself, not to the other person. You're saying it to the divinity within you. Everything I wanted for me, I asked for him. To this day, I pray for this gentleman, his company, and his family every day. And I didn't want my company to just endure this and come out of it and you're licking your wounds and going, oh my gosh. No. I said, I want this to be a launching pad for our company. I want us to be better off, better than we've ever been. Last year was the biggest year we've ever had. This year will be so much bigger than that. And it's because I used the mental equivalent. I took a look at what I wanted to create. I was very specific about what I wanted. And then I added the emotion to it. One of forgiveness to begin with for myself and him. And that's what it created. Those are hard things. Those are very real things. But that's what liberated me and allowed. And my dad and my attorney thought I was a nut. They just said that won't work. And I used to get upset with my dad about some of that stuff because he said, well, that just makes me so angry I can't see straight. Well, in that time period, he had cataract surgery. Pay attention to your words. He didn't sleep. I don't think he had a good night's sleep for 2 years probably. And in my ignorance, in my anger with my father, the way I look at it now is that he played a role to show me what not to do so that I can continue to adore him and love him and be grateful for him. To show me some of the things maybe that we shouldn't do. Because even at the end of that process, he had to have 5 stents put in his heart. You know, I will let no man force me to hate. How does it go? I will let no man, I will hate no one by me forcing them to hate them or something like that. I mean, it's just, I refuse to give up my energy that way. It's got to be about love and creating a more positive atmosphere. And so as we pay attention to the words we use, and since I'm talking about my dad and his health, we've all been to those family reunions, and Doug, this is the kind of family I want to hang out with, because the family reunions, that's blood family, and you have to take them home with you sometimes. But here you can just hug everybody, and then they're kind of like grandkids, you know, and you can put them back. Why is it that negative vibration is so much easier to talk about? You know, my dad's 76. He's had some health issues, and that's all he talks about. Well, why don't we talk about Brexit? You know, why don't we talk about what's going on with the European Union? Why don't we talk about anything other than that? And it's just, I think it's what consumes us. So if you have a health concern, if you have a health issue, respect it, honor it, and take your energy and focus it on someplace. Because I've heard him talk to my aunts and my uncles and his friends, and, oh, well, I've had this and this and this. And he's absolutely right. But you've all heard me say this before. Tell it like it is if you like it like it is. And if you don't like it like it is, tell a different story. Tell it how you want it to be. You say, well, can I do that? Absolutely you can do that. Because besides the mind not knowing negation, it doesn't know whether you're remembering, experiencing, or creating. Envision, imagine feeling better. And that's the NLP stuff that Larry was referring to earlier. You can stack anchors. You can do a swish pattern. You can do lots of things. If you're having a tough time creating what you want, see Larry. He knows how to do that stuff in detail, and it's very helpful. The problems in our life don't define us. Our responses, our reaction to the problems in our life. Circumstances don't create us. They reveal us. I think Chris Chenoweth said, it's not the load that breaks you down, it's how you carry it. You know, how are you going to do these things? Hard work is not the path to well-being, Abraham says. He says, feeling good is the path to well-being. So it's finding that feeling. Complaining about anything holds our mental equivalent on what we do not want. Justifying, blaming, feeling guilty, feeling angry only holds us in a position that we're trying to get away from. Be very specific. Use the right words, the right thought process. The very happiness of our life experience is determined by the mental equivalent that we hold. It's all happening because of our thought process. So I'm going to share with you again that one day I was driving Brenda to school. I think it was about 2 years ago. And she was in 5th or 6th grade. Daddy, how do you create something? And I said, well, sweetheart, it depends on how quickly you can get really clear about what you want to create. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, close your eyes and see what you want. I said, do you see it? She said, yes. I said, what does it look like? How bright is it? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? How do you feel when you have it? And then, being the bright young girl she said, Daddy, how long does it take to create that? And I said, well, it all depends on how quickly you can be clear with what you want and add a really good feeling to it. And I think that's hard for some of us to do, to put that good feeling. So you have all heard me say in the past, remember a time when you were vibrating off the planet. Either you saw the birth of a grandchild, you got off of a roller coaster and found out you were alive. I mean, take that energy, or love. Take any positive feeling that you've had and put it with your thought, that very specific thought. And that's where the magic happens. That's where the magic happens. I will finish with a quote that I left you all with the last time I was here, and it's still valid today. Lao Tzu said that if you correct your mind, the rest of your life will fall into place. Paul said, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And again, that key is to be disciplined enough to stay with a changed thought process. You got to be disciplined. The Buddha says, all that we are is the result of all that we've thought. The mind is everything. What we think we become. All that we are arises with our thoughts. Our thoughts make our world. So here's to creating and sustaining a new thought, a new mental equivalent for your highest and best. Namaste.